Good morning, everybody. Today I would like to present a case study from Thailand looking at the issue of energy security and power sector planning. I'd like to start with a brief history of the Thai power sector. About half a century ago, in 1960s, there was a pretty close competition between the centralized cooperatives model and centralized utility model, to serve as the way to electrify the country. And it turned out that we went the centralized route. The centralized model was actually chosen or influenced by co-op politics, not necessarily by technical superiority, as a way to rapidly gain the hearts and minds of Thai people during the co-op period. And after that, the three state-owned utilities were established to quickly roll out rural electrification and expansion of power system. At this point, capital was a major constraint, and the World Bank and aid agencies had a major role in determining the course of development in Thailand. But then, after that phase, we saw major expansion of the power system. Thailand became at least 90% electrified by 1990. And with that came also a lot of economic growth and a lot of wealth, and also a lot more access to capital. So there started to be some pressure to reform. I would call the pressure to reform neoliberal reform, starting with partial divestiture of EGAT's generation assets in the form of EGAT subsidiary named ECO and Ratchaburi. So these two would basically take the best generation assets that EGAT had and basically offered shares to strategic investors as well as the general public in the stock exchange market. And also at the same time, EGAT's power or monopoly over generation started to be eroded with the introduction of small and independent power producers program. So this is a way to get private sector to participate in building power plants through take-or-pay contracts, long-term take-or-pay contracts. So during this era, we saw an increasing role of private capital, particularly from foreign sources, because at that point, I think Thai companies still had pretty limited capital. And then after year 2000, Thailand toyed with the idea of introducing a commodity market for electricity called power pool. So basically, the plan was to make electricity becoming like a commodity that can be traded hourly. But that plan was abandoned with the California market going down really bad path, basically with gaming and power withholding. California suffered blackouts and also really expensive prices of electricity. So Thailand decided to adopt that plan, learning from the experience of California. However, the attempt to privatize the power sector in Thailand continued, but in a different form. Instead of breaking up EGAT's generation into pieces, into companies competing with one another, EGAT, the government planned to, EGAT is the state-owned utility in charge of generation and transmission. So it's the sole provider in the country. And the government's plan was to partially privatize monopoly EGAT in the stock market. So turning EGAT from a state utility into a corporation. So one leg in the public sector, the other leg in the private sector, seeking profits in this operation. However, that attempt to privatize EGAT as a state as a monopoly was fortunately thwarted by the civil society lawsuit. But even though the EGAT is not in the stock market, what followed was that there was an increasing financialization of electricity in the stock market through EGAT subsidiaries. So ECO and Ratchaburi are in the stock market. They are partially owned by EGAT. In ECO, EGAT has 25% share, 25% stake, whereas in Ratchaburi has about 45%. And through these companies and other energy companies in the stock market, they were able to form a lot of joint ventures with foreign capital to invest in the country as well as in neighboring countries. So we also, over time, we also saw increasing roles of Thai listed non-energy companies like Chuenchom or Italian Thai Development, which are actually construction companies being heavily involved in power sector investment. What followed was mushrooming power projects of both in the country as well as other countries. So what do we see as issues and trends with this kind of development in the power sector? First of all, we see a rapidly changing role of electricity. Electricity used to be considered a necessity, a public service that everybody has the right to becoming a commodity from which profit can be made. More importantly, there's a transboundary nature of the transformation as well. Commons like rivers, say in Laos or in Burma, with rivers with the multitude of roles serving life and diversity and livelihood for people. The roles of rivers are reduced to just one dimension, and that is, as an electricity commodity. And with that kind of change, we also see a changing role of policymakers. Policymakers who are who sit in, as permanent secretary or director of Energy Policy Planning Office, which is Apple right here. They not only work as full-time employees, but they also sit on the board of directors of many different energy corporations, and they are also pretty well compensated as board of director in these energy corporations. And what we see is that there are some questions about who they actually serve better. This table is a record of attendance by high-level energy officials in attending PTT board meeting. PTT was previously a state-owned petroleum utility that has been successfully privatized in the stock market. And as you can see, attendance, in the case of the permanent secretary, attendance of PTT board meetings was basically impeccable, 100%. But when it came time to attend meetings to consider whether or not electricity rates should be increased, he has a lot less basically a lot less attendance. So this raised the questions of whether or not the policymakers are actually serving the public or energy corporations. Another worrying trend is the rising conflict of interest from energy corporations serving having two identities. For example, in the case of Ratchaburi, which is actually not a state-owned enterprise, not considered a state-owned enterprise in the sense that less than 50% of the shares are not owned by the government, so it's considered a private corporation. However, look at the relationship. This is a slide taken. The image below is actually taken directly from Ratchaburi's document presentation to the investors. It really boasts the key strength, key relationship with EGAT, which is its mother company. EGAT is the monopoly, the single buyer of electricity. So all companies that want to sell electricity need to negotiate with EGAT. But Ratchaburi is one of the many different many companies that sell electricity, right? But what happens when you have EGAT, who's the buyer, and Ratchaburi, who's the seller, being in such close relationship? Here, it says 7 out of 13 members of Ratchaburi's board are EGAT representatives, including its chairman of the board and its president. So how do you expect that a seller like Ratchaburi to be able to negotiate in a fair manner with the buyer, who is EGAT, when the relationship is so close? So that's another worrying trend that we see. Increasingly, you see a lot of projects that are being sold back to EGAT. Have some are developed partly by ECO and Ratchaburi. Another trend that we see is that power projects and energy policy are driven by companies, not by government anymore, not by the public. The Power Development Plan, or PDP, used to be the master plan for capacity expansion for investing in power sector. It determines how many of what kind of power plants get built and when. However, in recent years, we see a diminishing role of the PDP. Some projects have popped up and were put on a fast track even before being listed in the PDP. Just to give you an example, the Sayaburi Dam in Laos and the much talked about coal-fired power plants in Dawei, 4,000 megawatts. So these projects haven't even been included in the PDP when they were raised as potential projects to be developed. Another trend that we see is how energy policy and plans have become tools to drive the stock market and churn profits. In the case of Thailand, the Thai stock exchange is pretty much dominated by energy stocks, and the electricity companies are part of that dominant force within the stock market. This table shows the price movement, the change in the stock index after the government issued a new power development plan, which called for a lot more power plants and IPP bidding. IPP is independent power producer. So this track the change in the stock price movement over a period of 1 year, before and after the plan was announced. And what we see is that the stock market overall The stock market overall saw a 20% price increase, this number here. But if we were to look further, what contributed to the increase in the overall stock exchange, we saw that the energy-related stock, the PDP-related stock, saw a massive increase of 66%, while the rest of the stock market only enjoyed modest 8.7% rise. So what do we see from this? We see how energy policies can really move the stock prices, and with people with insider information, people close to the decision in the energy sector can profit handsomely from this kind of decisions. And increasingly, you see that there's a disconnect between what's happening in the power sector from actual needs, actual objectives of the power sector, but instead the overriding force has become the capital market, the stock market. So what happens is that because everything is now being controlled or being pushed either to generate ever increasing profits, we see that investments are disconnected from actual need for electricity. In the past, actually, even currently, the official criteria for determining generation requirement is reserve margin. Reserve margin is the installed capacity in excess of peak demand. So in the case of electricity, we need to have a certain reserve margin in order to ensure reliability of the system, because we need to have some spare capacity in order to maintain, in order to be able to balance demand and supply. So in the case of Thailand, it has been determined that 15% reserve margin is sufficient in order to maintain the reliability of the grid. However, what we see in the case of Thailand's latest approved PDP, which is called PDP 2010, we see that this is according to the plan. A lot of power plants get added when we don't really need the electricity. For example, Namthurn 2, 920 megawatts was added when reserve margin was more than 28%, way above the required level. So same with Namngam 2, when reserve margin was 27. Gecko 1, which is a gas-fired IPP, was added when reserve margin was 27. Siam Energy, which is a coal-fired power plant, was added when reserve margin was 25, and there are many, many more that were added like this when we didn't really need the capacity. The planned new investments are excessive even after we consider the needs. The government issue official demand forecasts, which are based on GDP projections. And these, normally in the past, as you can see in the graph, the demand projections issued by the government are these different lines. So these are the different forecasts that have been issued by the government over time. And you can see that according to the official forecast, we would need to build a lot more power plants, right? And these forecasts are the basis for planning capacity addition. And it turns out that the actual need is much, much lower than the projected level. Just to illustrate how excessive the needs for electricity is, let's look at the year the Namthurn 2 came online. When Namthurn 2 was first added to the PDP, the government used the forecast that's this line, this yellow line, issued in year 2004. Back then, the government argued that we needed Namthurn 2 because we would have this much this much demand for electricity. As it turned out, when Nam Chon 2 actually came online, the actual demand was almost 6,000 megawatts below the projected demand. That is pretty much basically 10. This much over projection of demand is about 10 Nam Chon 2 dams. So you can see that even with exaggerated needs, the government still added even more excess capacity to the grid when we didn't really need. What happens to all the overinvestment? Overinvestment has caused unnecessary impacts, right? We learn about impacts on fisheries, impacts on air quality, and so on. And not only that, it has also become a burden on consumers. Consumers are not beneficiaries of massive investment in power plants, and the economy is not benefiting either. We have a lot of capacity that has been invested but not fully utilized. The debt that has incurred has become a drag on the economy, making Thailand less competitive in the global market. The former Prime Minister Thaksin stated himself that Thai power sector suffered from overcapacity worth 400 billion baht. This number is phenomenal compared to the total asset base of the power sector of only 700 billion baht. All the investment, overinvestment leads to wasteful inefficiency. This graph tracks the change in energy intensity over a 20-year period. Energy intensity is a measure of how much electricity is needed either to create a unit of economic activity measured in GDP or gross domestic products. So the more energy we use in order to generate PDP, the less efficient the economy is. So we can see that while the trend in the world, the black line here in the middle, you can see a downward trend of the energy intensity worldwide, but we are bucking that trend. We consume ever more energy in order to generate the same output of economic productivity. This is definitely a concern.
We mean Thailand.
We meaning Thailand. And last trend that we see is extreme inequality. As Vitun has already mentioned, there's a trade-off, and I just want to raise the case of Pak Mun Dam. In the case of Pak Mun Dam, it generates barely enough electricity to power one shopping mall, and but in exchange for that, 1,700 families have to be relocated. Over 6,000 families lost their livelihood. So the right to luxury and comfort overrides the right to livelihood, to living on ancestral land, to the right to life even for a lot of the fish species. So this is the kind of sacrifice that the government is demanding of little people in the name of energy security. This is a very clear illustration of the extreme inequality that exists in the power sector. So I think with the commoditization of electricity, I like to propose that now that it's time for Thailand, for Thai people, to rethink energy security and power sector planning.